On this day in history, 1974, there can be no question that anyone would have been shaken by the events that transpired in Memphis, Tennessee, home of singer Al Green, in the early morning hours when an ex-girlfriend burst in on him in the bath and poured a pot of hot, scalding grits on his back. So, fellas, let's let it be known, there's always another gay out there with crazier exes than you. Live from Wattpad Nation, it's the Corner Booth, a weekly broadcast where we talk about everything revolving around the squiggly little W. And this week, when we're going to focus on something in particular. When asked about the numerous failures before the successful invention of the light bulb, Thomas Edison said, "I have not failed. I just found 10,000 ways that won't work." So this week, what we're talking about is what we've done as writers that hasn't worked, and some that are. And so here to provide what pitfalls they've fallen into and what to sidestep and what to capitalize on, we have Michael and Shelley with us. And to kick this off, we're going to just play a little game of Scattergories. And it's just to get the brain juices flowing. And I know they both are avid fans of these games. It's really fun to see them squirm.
It's pure.
I hate it. We should go on strike, Michael.
I know. We really should. This is the episode where it ends. No, I'm kidding.
All right. So number one, sandwiches.
What am I supposed to do?
Oh, okay. In Scattergories, you haven't played Scattergories with us. Okay. What Scattergories is, I'm going to give you a list of 12 things, and those 12 things, I'm going to use my cell phone. It has an alphabet roller, and it's going to pick a letter out of the alphabet. With the list of 12 things that I gave you, you're going to have to match each category with that letter. So for sandwich, let's say that you got P, you got peanut butter.
Okay.
So a peanut butter sandwich.
So just put down an entry for each one that starts with that letter.
So you're going to give us a letter and a word.
So you get the categories at first, and then literally.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Got it. All right. So you'll catch on. You're very smart.
Oh, not really.
Number two.
Oh, the first one.
Sandwiches. Sandwiches.
Okay.
Number two. Items in a catalog. Number three. World leaders or politicians. Number four, school subjects. Number five, excuses for being late. Number six, ice cream flavors. Number seven, things that jump or bounce. Number eight, television stars. Number nine, things in a park. Number 10, foreign cities. Number 11, stones or gems. And number 12 is musical instruments. Now, you do get points, or you do also get points for... You also get points for alliteration. So if you're able to match up, let's see, what would be a good... What would be a good match?
So
But aren't they all going to alliterate if they start with the same letter?
Well, yes. You're going to have your first word start with a letter, but if you could do like oh man, I'm totally blanking on a television star that has a first and last name that
Oh,
like they had a first and last name that ended with the same letter, then you also get points for that as well. You don't get points for answers that are not unique. So if Michael gets a word that you have, then the points cancel out.
okay.
Okay. So let's see what your letter will be.
So one word per.
So Carl gave us one for ice cream, like for example, chocolate chip.
There, Carl. He's on top of it.
2 scoops for Carl. That's like a double.
Carl.
Nicely done.
Good job.
So are
man.
we supposed to come up with one word per these categories, or as many as we can come up with?
You can come up with 3 per line.
3 per line.
3 per category.
Okay.
I'm not trying to overlook it. I want to make sure that we take this as slow as possible.
It's okay.
All right, it's 90 seconds on the clock. You're going to have to use the letter C. Here we go. Begin. $15 seconds. There we go. Time's up. All right. Let's start at the top. Michael, what did you get for sandwiches?
I got club sandwich.
Shelley?
Caprese and cheese.
Oh, nice. Okay. All right. Make sure that you're counting up your points. Just leave a tally at the top. Items at a catalog. Michael?
Clothes.
Clothes.
Super interesting, right?
Yeah. Shelley?
Cars and caps.
Caps with a P?
Caps, like caps.
Oh, okay. I was making sure you weren't saying cats.
Caps.
Like not like feline. I was just like, what kind of catalog are you looking in?
And cars.
Awesome. Number 3, world leaders or politicians? Michael.
I totally blanked on this one. I have nobody. I should have had somebody.
I blanked on it too.
Oh,
Okay.
See, we're trying to block out like the whole thing.
I don't want to think about it.
Yeah. All right, school subjects.
Okay, so contrary to that, I put down civics.
Okay, yeah.
I had chemistry.
Chemistry, good. Excuses for being late.
I have no excuse whatsoever. So I have
Shelley?
I had car again. Could I use the same word twice?
Well, which one?
Car.
Oh yeah, okay. That's what I was saying. I was like, Michael, you've never had car trouble in California?
I work from home, and I mean, even at times, I don't go anywhere.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. Ice cream flavors.
I went with cookies and cream.
Nice.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I had Cherry Garcia.
All right. I love Cherry Garcia.
That's a better flavor, I think. But
yeah, Ben and Jerry's do no wrong. I do miss living in Texas though, because I have Bluebell homemade ice cream, which is the best ice cream in the world. Things that jump or bounce.
I got nothing.
Cats.
Cats.
Cats jump. Yeah.
They do jump. They do jump. I don't know how hard you'd have to throw them on the ground to make them bounce.
Well, they jump.
I'm sure they would. Yes. Television stars.
Oh, this is so embarrassing. I literally drew a blank.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't have anything else. So I'm done. I'm out.
Oh no! Well, you had a really, really strong open.
Yep.
Oh man, there's like a bunch of Chris's.
There's Chris Rock.
Oh.
TV star at times. Currently on Fargo, season 4.
Yeah. You always feel them when you go through them the second time. All right, things in a park, Michael.
I got nothing.
Foreign cities.
Casablanca.
Ooh, good one. Stones or gems?
Oh no, I've got nothing.
Crystal.
Crystal, man.
Will it work? I'm not sure.
A word popped into my head, but I didn't know if it was Copichon. Is that a? I didn't write it down. Is that a
I'm
gem?
not sure.
I don't know either. Popped in my head.
Musical instruments.
Cello.
Nice. All right, so how many points you guys got?
I've got 7.
8.
All right, Shelly, pulling out the win.
Did you give yourself extra points for your alliteration?
Yeah. That cookies and cream, I was like, that's going to get me at least a respectable category.
I know, I wanted to use chocolate chip.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't have been right.
No, I think that would have, Carl, that one's yours. You get
that was Carl.
Yeah, that's all Carl. That's all Carl.
Carl should have been playing.
All right, now we're going to move along to the meat of the discussion, which we call the entree. It's just the questions that we're going to kind of go over and just hash out and try to figure some of this stuff out. I'm going to start with you, Michael. What do you avoid when writing and building characters?
So this one was like a really interesting one for me. The thing that I actually try to avoid is I try to avoid reading something that's like of a similar vein, right? So like if I'm writing a mystery, I really don't want to be reading the mystery at that moment, right? Like I want to be aware of the genre. I want to have read lots of mysteries, but I actually kind of, it's a little bit of like I kind of want a little bit of a clean room in my head to not sort of blend and like kind of subconsciously pull in something that's not something that I'm working on, right? Like to not pull something else.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. What about you, Shelley?
Well, I thought I'd just tell a little bit about a time I actually failed because of this.
Okay.
So back in 2005, I won a contest for Harlequin. They used to do these little things where you'd send in a scene, and I came in first runner-up.
Okay.
So they requested a full manuscript. Now I'd been trying to write for Harlequin. I wanted to have Harlequin romance. I had a full MS. They requested it. So I'm like, cool. So I send it in. I get it back with a rejection. Not, too surprising. But the editor had written things on it. And one of the main things the editor wrote was that the characters were not acting out of their own motivation, but rather for the plot, for my plot.
Oh, that's interesting.
So,
that's an interesting note.
It's a great note because what I learned from that, and it's really hard to do, but trying to figure out who your characters are, what their motivations are, so that when they react to something or someone in your story, it's authentic.
Sure. So that's super important.
That's what I try to do. And it's really hard because you want the story to go the way you want it sometimes. I'm kind of like I'm more of a plotter than a pantster. So I kind of want things to happen a certain way. But of course, as I'm writing, my characters
they'll take the wheel. Take the wheel away. Yeah.
Can I ask, did you agree with that note? And did you agree with it like right away, or did you kind of, interesting.
I was in my 30s, maybe 40 even. At that point, I'm like, anything anybody gives me, I'm going to listen to.
Right. Yeah.
That's another pitfall that I think writers have, is wanting to hold on to their ego. It's like, if you have somebody who is an editor at Harlequin Romance giving you notes, don't get upset.
Right.
Just be like, this is awesome. This is awesome advice, and then pay attention to it. Because it's okay. We're not perfect.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. But how did you apply that to what you've been writing now?
I just try to keep that in mind when I'm writing. And I don't always succeed at it either. I mean, you might know these things in your head, but when you're actually doing the writing, you don't always follow your own best knowledge. I mean, you try.
Sure.
And that's okay too. Revision helps.
Yeah, I'm sure the editing process is a lot of fun for you.
Yeah, I think like to that point too, like there's a sign that I just a handwritten note that I kind of put over my desk that just says "Move on, fix it later," and I rewrite as I go. So even when I'm sort of done with draft number 1, it's actually been revised quite a bit, right? So because you kind of like, you do that scene and you're like, oh, it doesn't work. It's kind of flat. This character is, maybe they're just sort of servicing the plot, but not organically like servicing their own needs and agenda. And then you realize like, oh, that didn't really work. And it's okay, because you can just keep moving forward, because you're going to go back and you're just going to be over it a lot. So,
right. Well, in this particular case, it wasn't my main character. It was an antagonist. And it was necessary for my big dark moment, So he did this thing. But it was, and the editor was absolutely correct. Like, why would he do that? Why would he do that? There was no reason for that character to do what he did.
Yeah.
So, that's a big rewrite, because then you have to figure out a different dark moment.
Sure. All right. We keep going.
No, that's good. I just wanted to say too, when I'm creating characters now, I tend to write a lot, like free write about their character. So I'll just write everything as if they're a person I know or a person I want to get to know, so that you get likes and dislikes and gifts and problems and what they're concerned about.
Scrivener?
I tried. I just write notes in a notebook.
Okay. I know that it's not for everybody, but sometimes like that's one of the big things for that particular piece of programming.
Just similar to Shelley, I just want to really wholeheartedly endorse free writing as well, and the emphasis on free, right? So it's okay when you're writing that bio, or whatever, you're just kind of that background of that character. Like, you might put down 2 contradictory things, like an orphan and great relationship with their parents, right? Like that would not make sense in your draft, but it actually is.
It works for Harry Potter.
Well, you're exploring ideas in the free writing process, and you're letting yourself roam and explore and figure out like what's going to work and what you want to choose to do. And obviously, yes, like you can have parents and then be orphaned, and you might actually come to that conclusion by saying, "Ooh, I really want to address these 2 things and put them together."
Like it. All right. Creating thematic elements is like blending together a secret sauce. What's your recipe? I'm going to start with you on this, Shelley.
I don't really have a recipe for this, and I think this goes to what Michael was just saying. as you're writing about your character, the themes start coming through, right?
Okay.
Because they're, at least the kind of stories I write, I try to write character-driven stories, even if it's mystery or romance, or obviously romance. But so the themes will come out of what the characters are dealing with.
Okay.
And then when I start, that's like the major theme. And then as I start writing, usually other themes start popping up. Like I don't intend for it to be about this, but then they start popping up. And again, on a rewrite, you might want to highlight that so you bring it out more. And one thing I have to say, you know, I'm cueing Freud here, but I thought about this question a lot when I got it. And I'm like, oh, I guess I have a lot of similar themes in most of my books.
That's normal, I think. Yeah.
So it's like all my characters are dealing with parental disappointment. And I'm like, okay, well, something I know about, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe
you know? So I'm still working it through. I mean, maybe when I finally get through working it out, I won't want to write about that anymore and go on to something like the arts.
Sure.
So that happens. And then as other characters come in and they start interacting, other themes come up. So like I have a lot of themes that have to do with small towns, community, friendship, the power of friendship, women's empowerment. You know, I have my favorites, I guess.
Yeah, sure. And it's good to have those go-tos, and it makes it kind of your signature the more that you use it. That was an interesting thing for me, at least, for seeing people that have written multiple works and have embedded that same kind of thematic element through the entire thing. And it's kind of how you know that it's that person writing. It just becomes that signature. What about you, Michael?
So theme is, I'm really deliberate now about theme, but it's been kind of a long journey to get there. Like, so for me, I used to be a screenwriter, not a very successful one, and frankly, like not a very happy one. I just didn't enjoy it. I think part of the reason why I actually had to do with theme, right? So I would write scripts, mostly comedies. And you'd get a lot of notes as a screenwriter. So I'd get feedback that was, you know, on balance positive, but a lot of people would say, essentially, like, what is the theme, right? Like, why do we care, right? And I never really had a good answer, and I really didn't think it through in my writing process. I think for me, as a younger writer, what I was trying to do was trying to write movies that were like similar to successful movies, which is not a bad strategy on one hand, but not doing the work of like, why do you actually want to tell this story? And so for me, like that was a big failing, right? Like that was about 10 years of like banging my head against the wall, being like, do people really care about theme? Like, come on, does the audience like even get it? I've never been to a movie and come out of it and had somebody say like, you know, those themes were really, you know, let's talk about those themes. So I just didn't buy it. And I was hearing, but I was not really listening to that advice. I didn't really know how to process it. It took me a long time to kind of figure it out. I think for myself, it took a lot of growing up and just kind of figuring out that, you know, you have a finite amount of time that you get to write things on this planet, and figuring out, okay, well, what do you want to do with that time? I'm going to invest a lot of time in telling this story. I'm asking for the reader's time to read this story. So what do I want to say? And so for me, theme is actually one of the few things where I really don't want to start writing until I know what I want to say. And the topic is good. And I kind of, just to sort of like give everyone like what I'm sort of talking about is like, most people have seen Star Wars, I assume. That is very much, the theme is sort of like good versus evil, but obviously you have to get a little bit more specific. And really what you're kind of talking about is this idea of like good and evil. It's a battle inside of each individual, right? That's really what it's about. So when you kind of start to do that, like you realize like, oh, I have something much more specific to say about good and evil, right? I can't just say like everyone's always fighting good and evil. You have to get like really specific and say this is actually an individual battle that you're fighting within yourself. See Luke Skywalker, and you can kind of drill down and figure out like exactly what you want to say. So it took me a long time to get to the point where I said, like, actually, this is what I want to tell the reader. And I don't mean it in a didactic way of like, I want to give you a lesson for life or something like that. It's just, I just want to give you my point of view on these types of stories. And so that's how I think about theme. But it took a really long time to get there. A really long.
All right, I got you. That's nice. As long as you do. Did you have something to say, Shelley?
I would just say I agree with that, and I think it is a maturity kind of thing. And I think it's kind of ironic because, you know, I grew up. Well, I became an English teacher. That was my career that I'd never had. But it's ironic that in English class you're always talking about theme in these books, but then when you're writing, like as a teen writer or a young 20-something writer, I didn't put that together. Like you said, Michael, it's like that's something that, you know, Shakespeare does or Hemingway.
Well, people read Shakespeare and talk about it, but not like audiences and not like writers. It's for academics. It feels like it's for academics, but it's not.
It's not, no. Really but it could be like I couldn't do algebra until I hit college. So maybe it's something to do with your brain developing. You know, maybe your brain develops it. You know what I mean? It's okay. Just keep writing. I think to say to everybody, just keep writing and think about these things.
I was told that it was just like thematic elements or theme were the way that you feel after you close the book. And I don't know. I think that goes to show a lot of different kinds of stories, regardless of what you're reading. Once you close it, how are you doing now? Like what are your thoughts on what you're feeling? So like what you were saying with like female empowerment or just relationships in general, good versus evil. I mean, there's always something that you just left with. So nice little signatures for really, really mature writers, I guess you would say.
But I think some young people have that earlier than others too.
And I'm totally jealous of them. Like,
me too.
Because it's a lot of like it's just a lot of like life lesson that's sort of packed into it. I think of like, you know, because these themes are there's a lot of universal themes, right? And you probably want to be using one of them in your book. You do not want to like find new territory in that way. You might want to have a new point of view on it, but you're working in like very well worked over land here, and that's good. I'm in awe of the like 20-something writer and come into that theme and just say like, well, here's my take on it, and I've packed all of this life experience in 20 years, and like, boom, there you go. I didn't have it then.
Me either.
Yeah.
Good for them, though. It's very impressive.
Yes, we are all very impressed at you 20-somethings who are able to navigate theme. All right, question number 3. What does it take to truly form a formidable antagonist? Michael?
So the way that I think about the antagonist is actually kind of the personification of, so like if theme is an idea, right? If theme is kind of the take, then the antagonist is actually kind of the counter idea in a lot of ways. But, and this is really important, if you want to make them a totally flat antagonist, stop there, right? Like just stop with the idea, and that will be pretty flat. Where you have to go deeper is say, okay, why would such a person like ever personify that idea, right? And you actually have to kind of like figure out like, okay, how could that ever be a real person, right? Or, you know, a real character. And so you have to sort of like start to do that work. That also took me a really long time to figure out, though not as long, because like once you sort of figure out what theme is really doing for you, then the antagonist part should kind of click into place.
Gotcha. What about you, Shelley?
Yeah, what I was thinking is similar to that. Basically, just make sure your antagonists are as well formed as your protagonist. Make your antagonist a real person. So even the most horrible, horrible villain in their own mind is right. And they have good qualities and bad gifts, and they have weaknesses. So you want to bring those out. And I was thinking of an example. I don't know if you guys saw Devil Wears Prada, because it's
that's
okay.
Based on a book.
So the Miranda Priestley character is a horrible antagonist to the protagonist, right?
Mm-hmm.
But she has qualities that we actually admire. She's driven, she's creative, she has great instincts, she pushes people to be their best. These are all good characteristics. She's also selfish, demanding, dismissive, horrible to people, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And she makes the Anne Hathaway character, whose name I can't think of right now, the character's name, makes her life miserable. Andy. But at the same time, pushes her to become her best self. So I just think you don't want to have an antagonist that's completely horribly bad with nothing good. Or it's flat.
Absolutely.
Or it's flat.
I like that a lot. That example. One that comes to mind for me in particular, just growing up, because I was a huge nerd with comic books, was the Joker, and especially like Heath Ledger's performance, which posthumously won him an Oscar. It was so dark that when he wasn't on screen, you wanted to know what he was doing. That was the thing. And I'm hoping that while you guys are writing your stories, that you're thinking about, all right, what my protagonist is doing is great, but I wonder what my reader is thinking right now about my antagonist.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a really good comment, and I want to just add on one thing, which is, so I tend to for the most part I write first person, which means that usually my antagonists, they're dropped into a scene and then they drop out of the narrative. So a good thing to do as you're writing in that first person is to just sort of say okay, well, while my hero has been up to the following, what are the moves that my antagonist is making, right? Because they're not waiting around just being oh, I wonder what the hero's going to do, and then I'll just I'll just dash their plans. They have a thing that they're working on too. They have a life that they're living. They have all of these things in motion. It's okay to keep those things in motion. You just don't have to tell the reader about that.
Right.
You find a way to kind of clue them in that those things are happening, but you don't have to do a whole scene where it's and this is meanwhile what's happening.
It's kind of like looking at a chessboard and not knowing what the antagonist's move was.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's moving, but you don't know where he's moving to.
Exactly.
And it depends too on the genre. I mean, obviously in some genres, like a thriller, that's going to be a little different than, say, a romantic comedy.
Well, 100%.
Right? Yeah. So that's different. But I did want to point out too that I tend to do the same thing for my antagonist that I do for my protagonist, which is free write about them. And basically, I think that the antagonist can be a mystery to the protagonist, but that character should not be a mystery to the writer. Mm-hmm. You have to know who they are.
Gotcha. This is from Carl. He was just threw this out here. He wanted to talk about the anti-hero. Thoughts on that? Michael or Sally?
We could probably do a whole thing on anti-heroes. I'm not. I don't personally really write anti-heroes. I like stories about anti-heroes.
Sure.
That's a different challenge, mostly because what you're kind of doing is you're writing about somebody as a protagonist, but they're not necessarily as likable as a typical hero, and maybe they're actually, if you're really going to do it, they're probably really, really unlikable,
right?
Unlikable for a very specific reason, and that to me is the difference between the anti-hero stories that work and the ones that don't work. To me, the key difference is usually around it's like, how much do we buy why that anti-hero is that anti-hero? Because you're asking the reader to kind of inhabit the world of this person who, like, to put it mildly, probably sucks. And so you have to really earn it, you know, to say, like, okay, this is why I want you to get into that person's head. I want you to see their point of view. I'm not asking you to agree with it or validate it, but I'm asking you to kind of see the world through their eyes. And if you do that, I have something to reveal to you about the theme. Actually, you know, I actually have something to reveal to you about a take on the world and a point of view on the world.
Yeah. And it can be a cautionary tale or not.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just thinking about The Wolf of Wall Street, that movie.
Yep. Wolf of Wall Street, great
hero,
one.
Right?
Total anti-hero.
Because he was working against everything that we think should happen in society, and he wasn't a good husband or a good anything really. Mm-hmm. But we're kind of fascinated by
good liar.
He was a good liar, and he was good. He was a good salesman, and a compelling con man, right? But we're sort of fascinated by evil sometimes, right?
I think you have to be,
because there's power in it.
Yeah.
You know, all those vampire novels. I mean, they're anti-heroes in a way.
Sure. And it's just like when your parents say don't play with fire, you want to play with fire.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big fan of like Bret Easton Ellis's writing, and so if you look at like American Psycho, specifically American Psycho, and same with the movie too, but the book, both are similar in this regard. Patrick Bateman is like, I mean, he's a killer. He's murdering people. So you should not like, Bret Easton Ellis is not telling you should read this character and think, man, that's like who I want to be, or that's my hero.
Right.
That is your anti-hero, and you are having to face all of his darkness. Yet he's really charming, and he's really, really smart, and his quips and the way that he kind of describes the world, because what he's really writing is satire. Those kinds of remarks, I think, are why we actually like want to hang with Patrick Bateman for a while, even though he's just awful.
He's a very, very distinct kind of person. Like, I mean, there's nobody else that's quite like him, and I think it's very, very interesting to read about very unique characters.
And know they're out there. I mean, the world is diverse.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is diversity too.
Yes, and that brings us up to our next question. What's the right way to add some diversity in your story? I'm going to start with you, Shelley.
This is a hard question for me, and one that I ask other people all the time.
Okay.
I would like to add more diversity into my stories. I feel that's the right thing to do. But I also believe in writing what you know and writing your experience. So I'm from Maine, which is not the most diverse place in the world. I'm white. I'm cisgender. I'm heterosexual, married, 50-year-old woman. So basically, when I write my stories, I feel like those are the kind of people that I know. So when I do add diversity into my stories, I want to be very careful that I'm being respectful and that it's based on something or somebody that I've actually talked to and know. So it's a very difficult question for me.
Well, and what if people? Oh no! Yeah, absolutely. But what if people told you?
Well, I just attended an online Zoom panel for the Latinx on Wattpad and asked the question, you know, and basically they echoed that, like, just, you know, don't stereotype, number one. But I think the own voices thing concept is actually the way I am at this moment in my life believe in. So it should be own voices. And they echoed that. That people should be writing their own truth, not expecting me as a white writer or, you know, hetero writer
to
write for them. This is a very fraught question, and I don't want the wrath of everybody down on my head.
Oh no, not at all. It's totally.
But I also believe we need to talk about it.
Yeah,
and absolutely. Publishing is full of, white college educated middle class women, right? So we need more diversity in publishing in general. We need more editors. We need more publishing houses. We need, with diversity, and then we need more authors of diversity. That being said, I did in my last book, I did include a transgender character who had a small but very pivotal, important role in my main character's development and growth and where she ended up. So, I didn't write too much about it because I'm not. I know a few people who are transgender. I didn't feel like I could speak for that character, but I could speak from my protagonist's point of view, dealing with a student that was LGBTQ plus.
Right.
What about you, Mike?
What about you, Michael?
So I just want to echo like what Shelley was saying. Is this is a really, really important topic that's happening like throughout culture, and it's one of those things where I think we all would do ourselves a disservice if we didn't grapple with it, with everything that we're doing, right? But at the same time, so I want to say at the same time, when you're, really like when you need to grapple with it, and what I mean by grapple with it is like, don't think of diversity as check the box, right? Like it's a really easy thing to do to just say like, oh, well, I have a black character, I have a lesbian character, and you're like, oh, well, like done. That's not what you ought to be doing, right? Like you actually want to think about it, I think, as deeply as you're thinking about everything else. And so for me, like where it starts is thinking about the theme, first of all, right? Like, and we're going to keep coming back to theme probably in this episode, but like, so to me, like you can't, maybe you can, I certainly can't tell a story that is like so diverse that it represents like every type of person on this planet. That's not going to happen, but I want there to be diversity in my stories. So the question becomes like, well, what kind of diversity are you trying to represent here? And tying it to the theme that you're doing, I think, is kind of that good, like, it's that first like relevance test, right? And so I'll give you an example from a story that's on Wattpad, right? Like Peter's Little Peter, that I'm probably best known for. There is a gay character in that story. It's a gay man or gay boy. Part of why I chose to diversify in that way was because I was already trying to say something about masculinity. And I was trying to say something about how we have a very narrow definition of masculinity in certain kinds of stories, and how we really need to open it up because it does a disservice to boys and men to just be so narrow about it, right? So, what I was trying to do there, successfully or not, that's a different question. But what I was trying to do was to say, okay, look, the main character is a lot like me, right? Cisgender, he's heterosexual, he's a white male. Okay. His friend is a gay man. And that is kind of what I'm trying to do there, is use that relationship between the two of them. And it's just a friendship between the two of them, but use their sort of diverging qualities, if you will, right? Or their diverse qualities to explore what I'm trying to say about masculinity. And that's not to say that you couldn't have other kinds of diversity in your story, but like, I will tell you plainly, with that particular story, for a lot of reasons, I didn't want to talk about race at all. And you can kind of Google it and you can kind of figure out why. There's some just awful racial stereotypes. There's plenty to say. You could have, I could have. I wanted to sort of not do that and put that aside because that wasn't really on theme with what I was trying to get at there. That's not to say that I don't want to talk about race in a different story. So, but that story has to kind of like make thematic sense, right? So if you're putting diversity in just for the sake of diversity, I think it's going to feel very sloppy. If you're putting it in as a way to build on your theme, I think it's going to feel really organic. And that's kind of the first step. The second step is, of course, doing your research, talking to people. And of course, sensitivity reads are definitely a thing you can, especially on Wattpad, you can find many, many wonderful writers and readers who will gladly give you their point of view, right? If it's somebody who's different from you. And that's a great thing, because like, one, you're getting a lot of insight into the diversity issue, but you're also just like getting a lot of insight into that character, right? And the conversations that you're going to have with that reader who's going to volunteer to do that for you, you have to ask them nicely and they have to say yes and all that. But like, if you can find somebody to do that with, that person is really going to, I think, help you open up the world in a better way, because it's just deeper and more nuanced.
Sure, I love that nuance, because I think some of the strongest characters that I've ever read, they are the way they are. Their characters are their characters' flaws and their strengths are the way that they're put, but they just happen to be, for instance, they just happen to be a black character, or they just happen to be somebody who's gay. I think that in and of itself just makes it so that you're not making any digs at anybody. It's just you want to include a bigger world in what you're building. So I like that nuance is super, super important.
Also, you don't always have to say what race or ethnicity your main character is.
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, I just read Michael's book, which was very good, and I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
But I don't think you ever said he's a white kid.
I don't know that I ever did. I don't know that anyone ever got the impression that he wasn't. So to be fair, you're right. It's never.
How would you know? I mean, I think it could, anybody, maybe could put themselves in that position.
Yeah. And I think also, like, and this is maybe something that's not applicable to all writers on Wattpad, but it's applicable to some writers on Wattpad, particularly as you're trying to move projects into either like traditional publishing or film and television, is to think about, if you write it in such a way where, like, so if you're really deliberate about like, okay, this is a white guy and I have to just like double down for no good reason on his whiteness, right? You make it more challenging to adapt into, say, a film. Not challenging in the sense that, like, obviously a screenwriter is going to do that, and I don't think they're going to have any problem with it. But from a fan perspective, a bunch of people read your story and they got a vision of this person kind of stuck in their head, and you very deliberately kind of said, like, I am going to cement this as a certain kind of person. Then it's going to change. It's going to look very different to people. I'm not saying that you need to think strategically about that, but I guess the thing is like, if you're going to state it, ask yourself why, right? Like, why am I telling you his race, and whatever the race is, or whatever, frankly, anything that you're telling the reader, you should ask yourself, why am I telling them that? But if you're really thinking about diversity in your project, just ask yourself these questions, like, why am I doing this? Why am I picking a character that is this ethnicity or that gender, right? Like, these are questions that you really need to think about. And at the same time, I think if you think about them deeply, it doesn't mean that you write them perfectly on the first go, or that they're even perfect at the end. But I think people will give you a lot of credit for showing up in a genuine way and thinking about it deeply. If you're just careless and casual, you're going to get a lot of nasty feedback, I think. And maybe, I don't want to say rightly so, like, I don't like anyone getting kind of just trashed, but like, if you think about it deeply, I think by and large your audience is actually going to respond with a similar amount of thought. They might tell you things that you don't want to hear, right? Like, you might have some big rewrites ahead of you, and that's okay, but like, they're thinking about it as much thought as you put into it, they will put into it.
I like it. All right. Our next question up is, what genres do you avoid and why? Shelley?
Okay. Well, occasionally I like to read a fantasy, and occasionally I like to read a sci-fi book. So I enjoy them, but they're not my favorite thing to read. So I have not yet written a fantasy or a sci-fi, because I almost think you have to read a lot in your genre to know.
Sure. Yeah, that's important.
Right. So I'm not saying I never would.
Right.
But that's why, because I if I'm going to come to something, I want to feel like I could do it justice.
Maybe you could do like steampunk or something.
Yeah, I mean, I did mystery, but that was kind of accidental once, and it turned out well. But I had no intention of writing a mystery novel. But so maybe one of these days I'll write a sci-fi, and it will turn out. Also, horror. I seem to be writing horror every Halloween because they have these challenges on Wattpad.
Yeah.
And I tend to be done my latest big project, so I'm like, I jump into it. So I never wanted to be a horror writer, but I do read it more than I do fantasy or sci-fi.
But would you rather be with a romance or would you rather be with a horror?
Oh, give me chick lit any day.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Just make sure where you are.
Women's fiction, chick lit, women's fiction, rom-com. That's my jam. Yeah.
All right. What about you, Michael?
So I don't know that I like put a specific genre like off limits for myself, but I tend to sort of like ask myself like, well, like what is the story that I want to tell? And by when I say the story, I mean like there's certain types of stories, like there's a coming of age story, right? Like, so I do a lot of that in YA, but you don't have to tell it as a YA teen rom-com. You could tell it as a mystery. You could do it like a hardcore crime story if you wanted to. You could do a horror story that's actually a coming of age story. So you can do these. You can. I think what you want to do is sort of like look for the best possible vehicle. That's a little bit to do with the story. It's also a little bit to do, I think, with you as a writer. So to Shelley's point, if you've read deeply in a genre, probably you're going to do better writing in that genre than, because you have a sense of the audience expectation more than anything else, than in a genre where you've never written before. I'll give an example of a failure, since that's kind of really what this episode is about. The second screenplay that I ever wrote was a horror movie, and that was a terrible idea, to be blunt with you. And the reason was because I didn't like watching horror movies. I still don't like watching horror movies. They scare me. And I think I just approached it from a very cynical point of view of, hey, these things are getting made a lot. I want to get something made. It seems, it seemed to know a lot of people like, man, they got that made? Are you kidding me? And that's a very dismissive way of thinking about other people's work, which I really don't recommend, right? They work just as hard as you're working, whatever it is. But like, that was an example where I think I very cynically said, like, I am going to jump into this genre that I know nothing about, that I really frankly don't respect. And the work product was just dreadful. I mean, it was really, really terrible. And on top of that, like, I had the misfortune of, like, I brought this on myself, remember, like, I wrote several drafts of this script, thought, oh yeah, it's really great. And like assembled a group of friends for a table read and asked them to like perform it with me so that I could hear it, right? Which is the same thing that a lot of screenwriters do. And I like had the experience halfway through of like having to realize like, oh my God, this is one of the worst things I have ever written. It might be one of the worst things ever written, period. I've inflicted on this on my friends. My friends probably think I'm a terrible writer. Nothing is good about this. It was a really, really like tough learning curve. Now, my friends were actually like very nice, and they were like, yeah, it's okay, which was their polite way of saying, don't do that again. And that was a lesson that I also needed to learn. So like, I highly recommend, avoiding things that you don't feel a passion for, right? Like if you don't feel a passion for that genre, don't write in that genre. Right.
There are plenty of other people who will.
Yes.
So let them do it. Yeah.
It surprises me that you're not as into horror as you claim to be, Michael, because there's a lot of beats that are the same in comedy that they are in horror.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm surprised that it hadn't fascinated you to the point where you're just like, okay, well, let me try that.
So there's a great writer on Wattpad named T.L. Bodine, who is a friend, and she's written The Hound is like a really, really great horror story that my understanding is like it was announced that it's in development to be made into like a movie. She does amazing work, and I've talked to her about this. And the reason why I started talking to her about this was because she's also written. She has like a guide on Wattpad of it's kind of it's a nonfiction book that's really just breaking down the horror genre and every type of genre. And she makes that exact same point that you made, Matt, which is the comedy and the horror are kind of like inverse of each other. And so, yeah, the horror people like speak my language. It's just that literally they go left and I go right. I mean, it just, and I would probably, I know a lot of comedy writers who do like to go sort of like back and forth. For me, it really comes down to like, I'm a big chicken, and those movies, like the movies are most like they just scare me. I read Stephen King's The Stand, and I couldn't.
Oh man.
I felt, I loved it, but man, like it was like a month of just processing through just the tunnel scene of like I couldn't even handle that, right? And so like how could I write that in a way that would actually do it justice, right? Like if I'm too scared to write it and be passionate about writing it, the reader's not going to care, right? And that was like a good lesson too of like you really have to think about like your passion should be right there with the sort of like the most like rabid fans. Like you should be able to access that. And so that's the genre that you need to be writing in.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Harkening back to last week's show with tropes, I think this has something to do with it, because when you're writing, you're taking those tropes and expanding them, and you want to be able to do that.
Yeah.
How can you do that if you haven't steeped yourself in the genre, or you're scared to death to be there?
Yeah.
Right. Or you find it boring. So you're not going to be able to subvert those expectations of those tropes.
Well, the nice thing with Wattpad is that it gives you an area for like anybody can play in the sandbox of the genre. Mm-hmm. So even if it's terrible, it gives you the experience, and you can go on from there. I mean, A Quiet Place was a really good movie. I don't think it'd be a great book because there's very little dialogue and everything's quiet. So you just be writing that over and over and over again. But the way that you guys describe just the genres that you're in, that you're invested in, and the ones that you're not, it just makes it so that everybody that is writing on Wattpad can understand it's okay to not be into all of these different genres. Like you don't have to spread yourself out and say, all right, I love writing, so I have to love all of this. Like the best writers love everything. It's not true. It's like, everybody has their little nook that they like to be in, and they'll get comfortable and go from there. And maybe one day we'll see something horror from Michael and some sci-fi from Shelley. You never know. You never know. It might come out there.
I tell you, those Wattpad contests are like short story flash fiction contests are great, because you can just jump in. It's 500 words.
Yeah.
Try it.
Yeah, I would say like anyone who's watching this, like I highly recommend, like if you're weighing that question of like, do I write a horror? Do I write a mystery? Like what genre do I want to write in? Like, oh yeah, embrace flash fiction, short stories, shorter forms, because it's going to tell you very, very quickly whether you want to be there or you want to be somewhere else. And I think figuring out where you want to be for some people more than others is actually a big challenge, right? And sometimes like it was a challenge for me. Like well, first of all, like I started my career completely in the wrong medium. So there's that. And then moving forward and thinking like, okay, well, what kind of novels do you want to write? and having diverse interests of like being passionate about multiple genres didn't help, because it made me think, well, I could be any one of the 4 following things, right? And I literally had to get to the point where it's like, okay, basically write in 2 genres, and this is a professional thing more than a passion thing, right? But there are 2 genres that I want to pursue professionally, and I can alternate between the 2 of them, and I have a lot of things to say. So getting to that point of figuring out like, okay, where are you most passionate? Where can you excel? And doing those, that's a long process. Give yourself time, but like the short experiments are so much better than writing a whole novel and or a whole screenplay and figuring out that you are not that kind of writer. It's quicker.
The other good thing about Wattpad is you can like combine things a lot more than you could like, with a publishing company.
Mm-hmm.
So, you could combine horror with Western or whatever it is. You can combine it.
Man, I don't even. That's like a brilliant idea. I've never heard of the latest horror Western. That is a brilliant idea.
I just think those, it could be anything. It might be fun to put all the genres in a bucket and pull out 2.
Sure.
And write, and use that as a prompt.
I think I could do a lot of them, except I know for a fact I wouldn't be able to swing at chick lit. There's just no way that I'd be able to do it. I have no frame of reference.
They have like bro lit, so you could do bro lit.
There's bro lit?
I've never. This is the first time that I've heard their bro lit.
What is bro lit?
It's like chick lit, only it's from a guy's perspective. So basically,
there's like a lot of like dude hugs and fist bumps, and
it's more of a chick lit's more of a tone than anything else.
Yeah, and it seems so delicate that I wouldn't be able to handle it right. It's like, have you ever tried to make sushi? Okay, well, like it's kind of a delicate process, and making that roll and not having the all of the stuffing fall out of it.
Yeah. Don't rip your nori. Don't rip your nori.
No, I know. There's a very thin piece of paper. Oh yeah.
So we're covering sushi tips as well as writing. So this is a very multidimensional show. I like it.
Yes, exactly.
Sushi mat really helps. The mat, the little bamboo mat thing.
Yeah, that does help. That does help.
Need that.
And the saran wrap.
Keep your fingers wet.
See, that's the thing. Like I'm not good at that. I wasn't made to be a sushi chef. Unfortunately.
Now I'm hungry. Thank you. I'm starving for sushi.
Well, we're about to round this out with our last question, so you'll be able to go over and get some sushi somewhere in your town. Supporting characters are vital to any good story. How do you make them shine, Michael?
So I mostly try not to think of them as supporting characters, right? So they don't have as much narrative time, which is I think why we call them supporting characters. But if you could crawl inside of their head, they did not show up to be a sidekick, right?
Right.
That is not the essence of them. I don't know if that's like the essence of anyone. So giving them their own story, their own life is really important. But I don't necessarily mean that you have to show us that story, right? Like that's the different thing. So letting them have their own world and their own story, their own agenda, the things that are going on, that's great. You don't have to always follow them. What you have to do is see how it comes back and intersects with your protagonist, right? And that's really important. Usually, like as a general rule, they're either helping or hindering your protagonist, right? I like more adult stuff tends, these are kind of like, I call it slacker noir. These are stories that are like stoner comedy, sort of detective stories would be a little bit kind of, that's the mashup, right? So usually your sidekick character is helping your main character to a point and then also kind of screwing them over, right? Like kind of screwing things up for them. So like the classic example in the of the genre would probably be like The Big Lebowski, right? The dude is the main character. Walter is helpful until Walter is like really unhelpful. And actually Walter probably ruins a lot of things for the dude, but ultimately he's the dude's friend and things sort of work out. And so thinking about that person as having their own life and their own agenda and their own timeline is really the way that I kind of try to think about them.
It was funny. You mentioned kind of helping them and hindering them. It brings me back to The Princess Bride, where Inigo Montoya is he himself helps and hurts himself the entire length of the film. What about you, Shelley?
Yeah, I agree exactly with what Michael said, and I tended to do little write-ups on my side characters as well, just not as extensively, but just a little bit, and I try to give them one quality or one quirk that can come out, and I think that maybe has more to do with my genre than anything. So, just for an example, in my last book, I had an elderly woman who ends up being like the voice of wisdom, but she's also a crotchety old lady. And so several times throughout the book, she says, "Don't be a ninny." Okay. So it's not, you can't overuse these things, but enough. And it sort of establishes who they are as a character, because they do all have roles to play. Like Michael said, they have roles to play within the beats and within the genre.
And depending on how many that you have to remember or remind your audience, okay, this is this person that you met maybe 4 chapters ago.
Right.
And they have to have the same mannerisms and the same kind of, just the same kind of feeling. If you're not going to describe them spot on, if you're like the same way, you're going to have to find a different way to describe them just to make sure that you don't.
You want to leave the reader with a sense that they have a life,
Right, absolutely.
Off the page. And the corollary to that, I think, is sometimes, depending on your genre, they might become the protagonist in your next book.
Mm-hmm. And I think, like, Matt, you mentioned The Princess Bride, which is just like an all-time great movie and fantastic, right? And if you think about it, right, like, so this is Wesley's story, right? Like, I would argue, I guess, probably Wesley's story. There's an ensemble thing happening, right? But like Montoya is really just out for revenge, and if it was just a revenge story, all of the other stuff with Wesley and the princess just wouldn't matter, right? Like, he would just find the guy that killed his dad, and he would just kill him, and that would be the end of the story. So, he is a sidekick, or he's a supporting character. He's not really a sidekick, maybe more of a supporting character, but he is very fully realized, right? And he has a real agenda of something that he's trying to accomplish. And then, of course, he has Andre the Giant, who's like also his sidekick, right? So there's a sidekick on sidekick happening there too. But they very much have their own things going on. And maybe Andre the Giant's character doesn't have his own life as much. He's just kind of there. But definitely Inigo Montoya is like a standout sidekick. And the reason is because we all remember it, right? Like, you killed my father, prepare to die.
Yeah.
Right? So that's his thing. That's what he's all about. But it also means helping Wesley. And that's the main point.
Like it. All right. Before we close out of here, we like to give out something sweet. We'd like to offer up any Wattpadder who's been showing off that talent of theirs, or lift them up to the community. It can be a reader. It can be a writer. It's up to the panelists. I just let them decide. Shelley, who you got for us this week?
I have to give a big shout out to Rita Kovach. Kovach. She's been so awesome to me from the beginning. And lately she's been doing things like reviewing my new website and telling me when I screwed up on it. And, which is helpful.
Yeah.
And she also, has invited me to participate in certain things, including this. The corner booth, and she's just wonderful and a good writer, and thank you, Rita, and everybody go read her books.
She has quite a few. Michael.
So this is more of a community shout out, but we ended the Waddies submission period, but we've also now entered into the Shorties, I think is what they're calling it, or Waddy Shorts. I think we'll probably settle on a name as the contest kind of like runs its course. But I think we talked about this a couple episodes ago. This is this is this kind of contest that's really interesting because it's obviously it's a site-wide contest. It's the material is less than what you would need for a wadi. It's not what was kind of covered in Open Novella, so it's kind of this like beautiful sort of catch-all thing where you're going to get, I think, a lot of really eclectic, interesting types of storytelling, and it's not even just limited to, you know, fiction. There's nonfiction that's in there. There's poetry. I think you can enter a screenplay, believe it or not. So it's open to all kinds of alternative storytelling. Like personally, I write creative nonfiction, which is, you know, a sort of way of like a fictional novelistic spin on true stories, which is its own kind of thing. I write a very short form kind of stuff, but that kind of stuff is like fun writing warm-up exercises that I do and I post. It's really nice to see that these things that are really interesting and different that don't necessarily fit into like a specific category are being recognized. So just want a big shout out to anyone who has like already entered it or who's getting their material ready. I'm just excited because I just think it's really great that there's going to be a way to recognize things that don't fit neatly into a box, because that's really one of the strengths of Wattpad, in my opinion, is that you're able to experiment and push new boundaries and do new things. And this is one of those new things. And so it's very cool that people are embracing it and entering it. So all of you who are entering it, best of luck and just keep going.
Yes, absolutely. Gotta give those shout outs to people that are trying to make it. As we close, I'd like to give the chance for Michael and Shelley to just give a piece of advice to our audience and what can fit into a tweet. So, Shelley, I'll start with you.
The biggest mistake you can make in writing is to give up.
Yes, ma'am. Michael?
Similar vein. So my advice is to fail fast, fail often, and keep failing. And just to explain that, because I know some people might think that failure is bad, but obviously, like if you've watched this episode, Shelley and I think have both talked about moments where we failed, and actually I think we're better writers for it. So recognize that this is an iterative process, that you're always going to, the more work you do, the more stories you tell, you're going to become a better writer. So finding ways to fail quickly and to keep failing are really important, so that, you know, if you're in your like early part of your career or even your later part, whatever, and you write something and it doesn't work, and then you sort of just mope about it for a year, that's fine, but you're not making forward progress, right? If you were to fail as much as you could in that year, I can guarantee you the thing that you write at the end of that year is going to be much better.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was a lot of fun hanging out with y'all. We'll be here next week, same time, same great channel, and keep writing the good fight. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Night.